Um, they didn't tell us what had happened. They just said that the show was canceled.
The announcement came suddenly. No warning, no explanation. Staff were told only one thing. The show was gone. Overnight, Disney pulled the plug on Jimmy Kimmel's late-night program, and the fallout was immediate. Crew members walked away, executives scrambled, and a wider debate erupted about censorship, politics, and the future of free speech on television. At the center of it all was a single broadcast, a single remark that snowballed into an irreversible corporate decision. It began when Kimmel addressed a heated political controversy on air. His target was conservative commentator Charlie Kirk, who had just been linked, at least in the media conversation, to a violent incident. Kimmel's language that night was blunt, sharp, and carried a weight that network executives deemed risky. According to insiders, it wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. He accused right-wing figures of spinning narratives to protect their own, framing the attack as politically motivated and connected to Kirk's circle.
Some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score a political point.
The phrasing struck ABC executives as inflammatory, even defamatory. For them, it wasn't just comedy anymore. It was liability. Within hours, the recording of the broadcast was circulated internally, and the decision to suspend, then remove, Kimmel from the schedule was set in motion.
For everyone to come into work today, they didn't tell us what had happened. They just said that the show was canceled. Initially, my concern was, I hope everyone's okay, no one got injured. As they told us the show was being canceled, at the same time online, they announced that it was indefinitely, which we can probably assume is forever.
The cancellation blindsided his team. No one on staff was told the real reason. They were simply gathered, informed the show was off, and sent home. At first, I thought something terrible had happened. One employee recalled, like maybe someone got hurt. Instead, they just told us the show was canceled indefinitely, which of course means forever. That single word indefinitely spread across social media like wildfire. Fans and critics alike read it as permanent exile. To many, it wasn't just the end of a program. It was a corporate strike against a comedian for stepping into political territory. From Disney's perspective, though, the move was defensive. Executives feared backlash from advertisers, lawsuits, and political blowback if they were seen as endorsing or tolerating Kimmel's monologue. Within hours, statements leaked to major outlets, framing the suspension as both disciplinary and protective, an attempt to shield ABC from being branded as a partisan mouthpiece. And then, the story took an even bigger turn. Former President Donald Trump jumped into the fray. On his social media platforms, he applauded Disney's decision, not by dissecting the politics of Kimmel's remark, but by attacking Kimmel's career itself. According to Trump, Kimmel wasn't let go because of free speech. He was fired because he wasn't funny. He called Kimmel untalented, insisted his ratings had been in freefall for years.
Jimmy Kimmel was fired because he had bad ratings more than anything else, and he said a horrible thing about a great gentleman known as Charlie Kirk. And Jimmy Kimmel is not a talented person. He had very bad ratings, and they should have fired him a long time ago. So, you can call that free speech or not. He was fired for lack.
And claimed Disney had finally done what should have been done a long time ago. He said something terrible about a respected man, Charlie Kirk, Trump declared, but the truth is, he had bad ratings. That's why he's gone. This framing was strategic. By painting the firing as overdue housecleaning, Trump turned the controversy from censorship into performance failure. But his comments didn't quiet the storm. They inflamed. The story was everywhere, amplified by both political media and entertainment press, turning Kimmel's removal into a national talking point. Observers were quick to point out that Kimmel had long used late night as a platform to needle politicians. But this time was different. This wasn't satire about policy or lampooning a public figure's quirks. This was commentary tied to a violent crime and pointed directly at partisan groups.
This is government censorship. This is the Trump administration coming after people who speak out against him.
That difference, analysts argued, was why Disney acted so quickly. Inside the company, advertisers exerted their own pressure. Sponsors demanded assurances that network programming would not veer into potentially libelous or inciting commentary. Disney, heavily dependent on ad revenue, complied. The order went out, production would stop, the show would vanish from lineups, and staff would stand down. The media cycle took over instantly. Headlines didn't parse the difference between an indefinite suspension and outright termination. To the public, Jimmy Kimmel had been fired, and with Disney refusing to clarify, that perception hardened. For employees, The sting was even sharp. Many first heard about the cancellation, not from their bosses, but from Twitter and news alerts. Years of work, long nights, and loyalty to the show ended without even a proper explanation. Crew members were bitter, frustrated, and blindsided. Beyond the walls of ABC, the decision sparked wider conversations. Late-night comedy has always walked a fine line between entertainment and political critique.
This morning or last night, they waited for everyone to come into work today. They didn't tell us what had happened. They just said that the show was canceled.
For decades, hosts like Kimmel, Colbert, and Fallon have mixed satire with commentary. But this moment, critics argued, showed how fragile that balance has become. Some claimed Disney had drawn a dangerous line, signaling that late-night hosts could no longer wade into controversial waters without risking their job. Others defended the company, insisting that referencing real-world violence in such blunt political terms left executives with no choice. And just like that, a decades-long late-night career ended, not with a farewell episode, not with a send-off, but with a sudden silence. Industry analysts quickly zoomed out to frame the controversy in broader business terms. Disney's television arm has been fighting uphill battles for years, shrinking ratings, an aging audience, and relentless competition from streaming. To some, removing Jimmy Kimmel wasn't just about one monologue. It was a calculated reset, a way to protect ABC's brand from being tethered to political firestorms. For executives, the gamble was clear: alienating some viewers was less risky than hemorrhaging advertisers. In an era where corporate sponsors can pull millions of dollars overnight, Disney chose to safeguard its revenue streams, even if that meant sacrificing one of its most familiar late-night personalities. But the ripples didn't stop at ABC. Rival networks and watchdog groups seized the chance to amplify the fallout. Conservative commentators applauded the move as long overdue. A cleaning of house, progressive voices blasted Disney for buckling under pressure and abandoning creative independence. The polarization guaranteed that the story spilled well beyond entertainment news. It became a cultural flashpoint, debated across politics, media, and business. And then there was Kimmel himself. For days, silence. No official statement, no public defense. That vacuum fueled speculation. Some reports claimed he was scrambling behind the scenes to negotiate a quiet exit, while others said he was blindsided like everyone else. Without his voice, the narrative fractured. Was he the victim of ruthless corporate risk management, or a reckless figure who finally went too far? What couldn't be ignored was the timing. The country was still raw from the high-profile killing of Charlie Kirk, and emotions ran hot. Executives at ABC knew how dangerous commentary could be in such a climate. The decision to cut Kimmel destabilized more than just a time slot. Crew contracts, ad placements, and affiliate schedules all had to be scrambled, and Disney's silence, no replacement named, no timeline offered, only deepened the chaos. Meanwhile, the late-night format itself was under pressure. Traditional broadcasts have been steadily losing ground to streaming platforms and social media clips. Taking a big player like Kimmel off the stage raised existential questions. Was this the beginning of the end for network late night? Analysts pointed out that what once served as a nightly cultural gathering point was now splintered, with controversies like this accelerating the erosion of trust. Inside ABC, frustration boiled over. While most cast and crew members stayed quiet publicly, leaks painted a picture of discontent. Some staffers openly debated resigning in protest. To them, Disney hadn't just removed a host, it had betrayed the very principle of creative freedom. The phrase, "we're done with it," began circulating in hallways and chat groups, a shorthand for their exhaustion with corporate fear dictating art. That tension wasn't limited to late night. Across ABC, from talk shows to scripted dramas, whispers of unease spread. If a network mainstay like Kimmel could be erased overnight, who was safe? Some actors began hinting through their reps that they wouldn't renew contracts under such precarious conditions. Others viewed the situation as proof that creative talent was being treated like disposable assets in service of corporate caution. The discontent surfaced most visibly on The View, the daytime show known for its fiery mix of entertainment and politics. Behind closed doors, producers worried they might be next. Internal conversations leaked, suggesting some panelists threatened to walk if Disney continued treating political commentary as grounds for dismissal. "We're done with it," reportedly became a rallying phrase, encapsulating both their fear and their defiance. Even scripted shows like Grey's Anatomy, which weren't directly tied to political commentary, felt the shock. Cast members had built entire careers on the network's stability. Now that stability looked fragile. To many, Kimmel's firing was less about him and more about what it revealed: a willingness by Disney to pull the trigger without consultation, warning, or explanation.
There's plenty of conversations going on to do something, because you just can't stand by and let stuff like that go on.
Stuff like?
Well, Jimmy getting his show pulled for, freedom of speech.
The resignations started small. A handful of crew members from Kimmel's team walked out in solidarity, while others simply had no choice after their jobs evaporated with the show. But as Disney failed to manage the transition, what began as symbolic protest turned into a wave. Soon, higher-profile names joined. Longtime producers, contributors to ABC's news segments, and even behind-the-scenes veterans began submitting resignations. Many cited the same issue, a collapse of trust between management and talent. While not every departure was publicized, trade outlets quickly caught wind, framing the exodus as an unfolding crisis. What gave the revolt its identity was a simple phrase: "We're done with it." Employees repeated it in interviews, statements, and posts. It captured the anger of a workforce that felt stifled, blindsided, and discarded. Disney may have intended to silence a controversy, but in the process, it had ignited something larger, a movement inside ABC that was no longer about Jimmy Kimmel alone, but about whether creative independence could survive corporate control. The phrase, "We're done with it," quickly evolved into more than just a slogan. Inside ABC, it became a rallying cry. For many, it was shorthand for rejecting the rigid, corporate-driven work culture that Disney had been imposing on its network properties. Commentators across the industry compared the exodus to earlier flashpoints in television history, when collective pushback from cast or crew fundamentally reshaped the industry. Some drew parallels to high-profile standoffs at NBC and CBS, where networks had once underestimated the breaking point of their own talent. What made this moment different, however, was its timing. Advertisers, long the backbone of network television, were already skittish. For sponsors, the appeal of a network like ABC had always been its predictability and its ability to keep audiences coming back. The sudden appearance of chaos, resignations, and internal dissent rattled that image. Some advertisers even paused their commitments, preferring to wait and see if Disney could patch the widening cracks. What had begun as a reputational issue now carried direct financial stakes. Disney's executives attempted to project calm. Their official statements emphasized stability. Contract obligations would be honored. ABC remained committed to its flagship shows, and replacements would be found where necessary. But to staff and insiders, these reassurances rang hollow. The crisis wasn't about whether a time slot would be filled. It was about whether talent could trust the company not to treat them as expendable. The firing of Jimmy Kimmel had become the clearest evidence yet that management prized corporate optics over loyalty or communication. Public perception only accelerated the downward spiral. Media outlets framed the resignations as a protest against Disney's mishandling of the situation, amplifying the narrative of betrayal. On social media, the hashtag "We're done with it" spread, becoming a digital rallying point for broader frustrations with corporate overreach in entertainment. What Disney viewed as a contained personnel matter was now recast as an industry-wide symbol of corporate dominance colliding with creative independence. Even inside Disney, fault lines appeared. Some executives defended the decision to cut ties with Kimmel, arguing that political escalation or legal entanglements weren't risks worth carrying. Others quietly admitted that the move had snowballed into a larger crisis than the initial comments ever could have caused. These internal disagreements seeped into press coverage, reinforcing the impression of a corporation struggling to keep control of its own story. Meanwhile, the ripple effects on ABC programming were impossible to ignore. Good Morning America had to reshuffle its production staff. The View entered tense standoffs with panelists debating whether they might walk away as well. Even long-standing scripted juggernauts, like Grey's Anatomy and Station 19, found themselves swept into speculation, with journalists questioning whether their casts might begin demanding contract protections or exploring moves to rival platforms. The instability was eating away at ABC's brand, which had always relied on consistency as its strongest asset. Agents quickly seized the opportunity. Many began pressing for new clauses in contracts that would protect their clients from abrupt termination, while others looked to reposition their talent on streaming platforms, where flexibility and autonomy seemed more achievable. In this light, Kimmel's dismissal didn't just destabilize late-night television, it shook Disney's standing in the broader talent market. Rivals were already presenting themselves as safer havens, offering environments less likely to be dictated by corporate panic or political blowback. Industry commentators framed the resignations and fallout as part of a broader labor movement, just as Hollywood writers and actors had gone on strike for better conditions. The "We're done with it" movement came to symbolize resistance against unchecked corporate dominance. Suddenly, the firing of one late-night host was reframed as part of a generational struggle between the business interests of giant media conglomerates and the creative independence of those who filled their screen. The irony was not lost on critics. Disney, the same company that for decades had marketed itself as the gold standard for cultural stability, was now painted as a place where careers could be derailed overnight by a single executive decision. What was once its strongest reputation, as a safe home for talent, had eroded. Instead, Disney was now seen as unpredictable, governed less by loyalty and vision than by fear of political and financial fallout. By the time the dust began to settle, ABC was no longer dealing with a one-off controversy. It was grappling with a systemic breakdown in trust, the kind of fracture that forces an entire industry to rethink its foundation. The resignation wave exposed how fragile the television ecosystem had become, where even the decision to suspend a single host could unravel decades of stability. From there, the consequences rippled outward. The crisis touched late-night television, ABC's brand identity, and Disney's long-term positioning in the entertainment landscape. The once sturdy assumption that television could weather storms without losing its core talent was gone. In its place was a new reality, one where corporate overreach had consequences not just for shows and schedules, but for the very trust networks needed to survive. And yet, amid the fallout, one sentiment persisted across media circles: Jimmy Kimmel himself would likely land on his feet. With nearly 20 years of late-night experience, a loyal fan base, and a reputation for sharp wit, few doubted he would resurface elsewhere. But for ABC and Disney, the damage wasn't so easily repaired. What started as a suspension had snowballed into a corporate identity crisis, one that raised pressing questions not only about the future of late-night TV, but about whether network television itself could survive the era of fractured trust. The financial consequences of the crisis compounded the reputational damage. Advertisers, already hesitant, delayed major commitments as resignations spread across ABC's lineup. To keep sponsors on board, Disney resorted to costly concessions, discounted rates, compensation packages, and make-good advertising slots. Despite these efforts, ratings slipped across several programs as audiences interpreted the network's turmoil as evidence of dysfunction at the corporate level. Analysts warned that ABC's credibility, both with advertisers and with its viewers, had taken a blow that could take years to repair. The third major implication stretched beyond ABC to Disney itself. For decades, Disney cultivated its image as a cultural giant, balancing entertainment with branding and corporate polish. Yet in recent years, that image had been eroding. A series of underwhelming box office performances, mounting streaming losses, and steady declines in stock value had already rattled investor confidence. The Kimmel incident made those vulnerabilities glaring. Instead of projecting strength and decisiveness, Disney's abrupt handling of the controversy and the resignations that followed suggested instability. For investors, the turmoil looked less like a one-off miscalculation and more like a symptom of structural weaknesses inside Disney's leadership. And while Disney scrambled to steady itself, competitors seized the moment. Netflix, Amazon, and Apple leaned into the opportunity, aggressively courting talent, now wary of network oversight. Agents representing ABC actors and staff opened conversations with streaming services that promised creative freedom and fewer restrictions. The result was a wave of migration, accelerated by the fallout, that redirected talent away from traditional television toward digital-first platforms. The fourth implication was cultural. For years, late-night hosts had been more than entertainers. They doubled as political commentators, framing public discourse and reflecting cultural tensions through humor. By firing Kimmel over politically charged remarks, Disney redrew the boundaries of what could be said on network television. The decision signaled that corporations were no longer willing to tolerate monologues that drew direct links between political groups and violence. Critics decried the move as censorship, a narrowing of free expression on mainstream media. Supporters, however, defended Disney, arguing that corporations had a duty to avoid amplifying inflammatory rhetoric. The clash revealed just how divided America had become over the role of satire and political commentary in public life. The resignations amplified this cultural shift. When staff and cast declared, "We're done with it," they weren't only voicing frustration with Disney's treatment of Kimmel, they were rejecting a system in which creative independence was consistently subordinated to corporate caution. This sentiment echoed across Hollywood, connecting with broader labor movements where writers, actors, and crew demanded not just fair pay, but autonomy and respect. What happened at ABC became part of a larger narrative, a fight against corporate overreach in entertainment. The fifth implication lay in the paths of those who walked away. Some former members of Kimmel's team quickly found work with rival networks. Others transitioned into digital media companies, producing short-form, viral content. Prominent ABC contributors entered talks with streaming platforms, where they positioned themselves as voices of independence in contrast to Disney's rigid structure. Meanwhile, ABC attempted to stem the bleeding by promoting internal replacements and spotlighting its ongoing programming. But speculation about future walkouts persisted, undermining every attempt at stabilization. Advertisers, wary of committing, hovered on the sidelines, waiting for proof that the crisis wouldn't escalate further. The sixth implication concerned the fragile relationship between corporations and their audiences. Disney's decision underscored how much advertisers and investors shaped its priorities. For audiences, however, the firing read as corporate disregard for cultural figures who had defined network television for years. That gap between what executives prioritized and what viewers valued further eroded trust. Disillusioned audiences turned increasingly to streaming services and independent creators, accelerating the decline of traditional networks. The political fallout also ensured the controversy stayed alive. Conservative commentators framed Kimmel's removal as long overdue accountability, while progressive voices condemned it as capitulation to pressure. The polarized reactions guaranteed weeks of headlines. Kimmel's own silence only deepened the intrigue, allowing both sides to project their narratives onto him. By the time the dust settled, the entertainment landscape looked different. ABC's brand was damaged. Disney's vulnerabilities were exposed. Late-night television's decline had accelerated, and talent migration to digital platforms was undeniable. The phrase, "we're done with it," solidified as a cultural symbol of resistance against corporate dominance. The legacy of the Kimmel firing was not just the removal of one host, it was a stark reminder of how fragile network television had become. Once central to American culture, late-night programming now exists mostly as short clips consumed online. Once stable networks now appear volatile, beholden to advertisers and vulnerable to political backlash. Once loyal staff now prize autonomy over tradition. For Disney, the controversy underscored the near-impossible task of balancing cultural influence with corporate caution. In trying to protect itself from liability, the company ignited a rebellion that tarnished its brand and accelerated an exodus of talent. For ABC, the resignations left both programming gaps and a lingering distrust that no quick fix could mend. For the industry as a whole, the incident confirmed that the future lies not in preserving late-night television, but in adapting to the digital realities, reshaping how people consume content. Jimmy Kimmel's removal was never just about one comedian or one network. It became a test case for the limits of free expression in corporate media. His firing sparked resignations, fueled a cultural movement, and exposed the fragility of an industry once thought unshakable. And with that, we've reached the end of this deep dive. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Hollywood's shifting landscape, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out the videos on your screen for more. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation about creative freedom versus corporate control is far from over.